All right, today we're going to talk a little bit about economics and a change in economic thought during the Industrial Revolution. And so we have to remember that Western society, especially Europe and the United States, will transform from an agricultural society to an industrial one. And these are two paintings of Manchester, England. Here's one in 1820 and one in 1857. And you can see how dramatic this change is, right, with the smokestacks here in the background. And so with this dramatic change, we kind of highlight the old problems between the haves and the have-nots. So economic philosophers are going to try to address this problem. So with these challenges, right, people start to study economics, and this is a social science that deals with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. And economics also deal with the material welfare of humankind. So let's kind of get some specifics here with this time period. And so these are two 19th century English economists and their ideas. The first one here is Thomas Malthus. He felt that at the rate the working class was going, that people are just going to have too many children, right? And, well, I should say not just the working class, but everybody, because life is getting easier, right? There's more food. So people were living longer, having more children, but he saw that as a bad thing, right? That eventually there will not be enough food. So he advocated people getting married later, practicing celibacy, right? Not having sex, or at least using contraception. And in connection with that is David Ricardo and his iron law of wages, right? So this is a little diagram of this iron law. As wages rise, people will have more babies, and then that just produces more laborers in the workforce. Then wages will drop, so then people will have less children, so then the wages will rise, and you get the picture. Both of these men support laissez-faire philosophy and believe that the poor should just help themselves by having fewer children and saving their money. Easier said than done, perhaps. So laissez-faire, what is it? It's a kind of, in English, a rough translation is let people do as they please. And to think about what that means, we have to remind ourselves of mercantilism. And if you recall discussing this when you learned about the Age of Exploration, and we saw for centuries, right, where states were the king, etc., or queen, was directing all the economic policy and establishing colonies and all the things that go along with that. And this belief in laissez-faire is that it was an economic policy of letting the owners of industry and businesses set the working conditions without the interference of the government, right? And someone who defended that issue is this man here, Adam Smith, and he wrote about it in The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So you can see it took a little while for those ideas to sort of become more mainstream. And he defends a free market economy. And so these words, laissez-faire, free market economy, are all sort of similar words for the same thing, basically that the government should leave the economy alone. So he felt that if everyone could pursue their self-interest, that businesses could compete, and we let supply and demand just kind of go as it should, this would all produce economic progress, right? So liberty, freedom, without government interference. So Ricardo, Malthus, and Adam Smith will serve the foundation for something that will be known as capitalism. And capitalism is an economic system in which the factors of production, right, are privately owned and money is invested in business ventures to make a profit. So again, the government kind of stays out of the economy. So who or what controls the economy? The force of supply and demand, right? The consumer. We are consumers. we drive the economy. And what we want, right, the businesses will come in and supply it for us. And if we don't want it, right, businesses will change. Everybody pursues their own economic self-interest. Adam Smith said, right, everybody benefits. So people started to then think, could we build a better society? You know, looking at the challenges out there, you know, could things get better? So we had various types of reformers, right? We had evangelical reformers, and so these are religious groups. Kind of a religious revival is experienced in Europe, especially with Protestant evangelicalism. In England, they will end slavery, and they will start to promote laws, you know, lobby the Parliament in England to have laws that will stop the exploiting of women and children. There's also utilitarian reformers, that they would promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, and that the government should be a little bit involved, right, in some of these ideas. So again, so utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham right here, kind of explains this a little bit more, that you should judge ideas, you know, religion, philosophy, and institutions, the church, the parliament, prison system, I mean, whatever, based on their usefulness, right? So that the government works to provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And perhaps you start to see maybe these are men and women who are arguing against or an alternative to capitalism. And so we also start to see something called socialism, right? That the factors of production, land, labor, and capital, are owned by the public and operated for the welfare of all, and that the government should plan the economy, and if they did this, it would end poverty and establish equality. So these are all interconnected. There was also various utopian philosophers. This, for example, Robert Owen. He thought, what if we cooperate rather than compete? And so here's one of his ideas of his factory systems where people would cooperate. So one factory would make the sweatshirts, right? Another factory would make the sweatpants. And the consumers get what they need, a workout outfit, but these factories didn't need to compete with each other or drive wages down, etc., to make money because everybody's benefiting. So we've got utilitarianism, we got a little socialism, we got capitalism, and so these are just some of the ideas that are floating around during the Industrial Revolution. So the complication with socialism is it depends on who you ask, right? There's French socialists, English socialists, German socialists, Russian socialists, American socialists, but the two probably most influential socialists are Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Germans. So Karl Marx here is a German philosopher, and he felt that early socialist ideals were impractical. He's a little radical. He gets in trouble at the university and is exiled. Eventually he meets up with this guy, Friedrich Engels, who was also German, however fairly wealthy. His father owned factories, I believe, in Manchester, so he's the son of a manufacturer, and he's horrified at the working conditions. And together they will sort of influence each other and become fairly then influential philosophers. So Karl Marx had various theories that he wrote about in lots of books, but he felt that history essentially is conflict, right? When we study history, he says what we're really studying is a conflict between the oppressors and the oppressed. And the minute the first food surplus was developed in ancient Mesopotamia, right, you started to see conflict arise, and that there was an oppressor class and an oppressed class, right? That these societies all had slavery, etc. And he said these conflicts produce different dominant groups. And in the case of the Industrial Revolution, he felt that the new dominant group was something called the bourgeoisie. And I'm sure you remember this term from your French Revolution discussions. And of course, you're writing all of these capital letters. all these words throughout the slideshow with capital letters down because these are vocabulary terms you need to know. So if you want to be cool when you're discussing economics, you use the word bourgeoisie, right, when you're talking about the middle class, or at least if you like to be a Marxist. And then he said, so they are the new group, and then the current conflict then is between the bourgeoisie, the middle class, right, as you recall from the French Revolution, and the proletariat. And this is, again, Marx's new word, I think, based on some Latin stuff. And that the proletariat then becomes the working class. And so this conflict then is what people are witnessing right now during the Industrial Revolution. And so keeping all that in mind, who rules society and politics during the Industrial Revolution? Of course, I know what you're answering, the bourgeoisie. And Marx says, well, how do you get the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, to give up control? Well, revolution. And he says capitalism is just a one stage of a multi-stage stages of economic development, and that the final stage is something called communism, which is a form of complete socialism where the means of production, land, factories, businesses, etc., will be owned by the people, and then there will be no private property. So communism and socialism are sort of the same thing, right? That eventually he saw that socialism would bring people to communism through revolution. So he and his partner Friedrich Engels wrote something called the Communist Manifesto in 1848 that outlined these ideas, and he thought by doing this he would answer some of these problems. So there you have it. These were the different competing economic philosophies during the Industrial Revolution, and I'm sure these words are familiar to you. You can understand that the debate continues. Here's my little citations. All the images are from Wikipedia, and the Google search of images that are only in the public domain.